You took your first breath among dozens of slaves. As soon as your mother finished giving birth, she went back to work. That means you spent your first hours in this world alone, hungry, thirsty, and crying as a helpless baby. Yes, welcome to ancient Rome. Because your mother worked so much, she was exhausted and couldn't take care of you as much as she should have. Because she couldn't eat properly, she was a frail and weak woman. Once it was determined that you were a healthy baby, you were entered into the inventory. Yes. Technically, you are your master's new worker. With very little food, eating broad beans at every meal, you become skin and bones by the time you turn 5. Now that you are 5 years old, you are old enough to start working. On your master's farm, you do jobs that aren't extremely heavy, like carrying water or hauling straw, but they have to be done quickly. In return, they give you food. But you have some incredible news. You can now eat barley as well, not just broad beans. The bad news is that you don't have any days off. The work you do every day is like lifting weights in a gym. Of course, now that you're working, they increase your food portions, so you slowly start to get stronger. When you turn 8, your mother passes away due to a serious illness. Because treating her was considered more expensive than putting a new slave to work, the master chose not to have her treated. Of course, even though you are furious about this, there is nothing you can do because you are chained. Yes. In ancient Rome, between 30% and 40% of the population consisted of slaves. Thousands of people were enslaved in the wars that were fought. In this system, even married families were deliberately broken apart, sold to different masters. Women were usually used for domestic work, cleaning, cooking, childcare, and many other household duties. So you were the child of a family that had been captured in war and enslaved. If male slaves were strong, they were used in agriculture or in heavy labor such as the mines. Those who were skilled or educated were made to work as teachers or master craftsmen. Some were sold to gladiator schools. Others became the personal guards of their masters. Anyway, by the time you turned 13, you had grown up working in the fields, basically doing real-life bodybuilding training. There were no things like protein powder, but the combination of broad beans and barley had turned you into an incredibly strong kid. At just 13, you had massive, visibly developed muscles and arms stronger than even slaves much older than you. Of course, this made you very valuable to commanders who were looking for fighters for the arena. A commander wanted to buy you, and the moment your master heard the word money, he sold you without hesitation. The commander seemed like a good man, so you thought you were lucky, but not much really changed. You trained as a gladiator until the age of 15, and at 15, you fought in your first match. There were different types of gladiators, and each type had its own fighting style. But the fighting style was decided solely by the commander. Maybe you become a murmillo, wearing a helmet shaped like a fish. Maybe a retiarius, fighting with a net and a trident. Or a thraex, with a small shield and a curved sword. Every style had both advantages and disadvantages. The murmillo's helmet protects your head, but it limits your vision, you might not even see a strike coming at your knee. The retiarius fights almost naked. If you're not fast enough, you're done. The commander wanted you to fight as a retiarius gladiator. This was bad news for you. You had a net in one hand, a trident in the other, and a short dagger at your waist. Your armor was nothing more than a shoulder guard, and even worse, your opponent was fighting in the murmillo style. In that situation, fighting a bear might have been a safer way to live longer. But with your agility and raw strength, you ended the fight almost as soon as it began. Your opponent surrendered immediately. This actually turned out to be bad for you. The crowd had expected more, but you hadn't given them an entertaining show. Because of that, many people called for your death, and the noise grew louder and louder. But the commander refused, and you walked away unharmed. Yes. Feeding and training gladiators was very expensive. That's why you wouldn't end fights quickly anymore. You were expected to put on long battles and flashy performances to entertain the crowds. Fighting this way, you made it to the age of 20. By then, you had drawn the attention of everyone, even the kingdoms themselves. On the days you were set to fight, everyone went to the arena. On the day of your next fight, you learned that your opponent wasn't a gladiator, but a lion. Lions were kept hungry for weeks before being brought into the arena. This made them more aggressive and more dangerous, but also more exhausted. Even so, gladiators who faced a lion in the arena usually surrendered. In fact, those who wanted to escape slavery or who led rebellions were often forced into the arena to fight lions with nothing but their bare hands. This served as a form of punishment, a warning to other slaves, and a source of entertainment for a chaos-hungry crowd. But you also walked away alive from your fight with the lion by fighting it head-on. There was no option to knock the lion out or force it back into its cage. Fights like these always ended with a loss either for the gladiator or for the lion. It wasn't just lions, many different kinds of animals were used. These fights were usually not standard gladiator matches but part of animal hunting spectacles called venations. Animals like lions, tigers, bears, and crocodiles were brought from Africa or Asia. The goal was to show the audience Rome's power over nature. Gladiators who became too powerful or behaved too independently were sometimes forced into these fights as a form of punishment, even if only occasionally. Anyway, with this victory, you also earned your freedom. Because you were the people's new hero. Everyone now wanted you to live. The first thing you did was secure the wax tablet that granted you your freedom. In Rome, if you were caught without proof, someone could step forward and say, "That's my slave." You could be chained again. So you placed it in a small leather pouch and hung it around your neck. You decided to use the strength and fame you had earned through years of fighting. You opened a training ground. For the first time, you began living in your own home, a small stone house with a tiled roof and a little garden. One day, you decided to go to the slave market. As you read the tags hanging from the slaves' necks, you suddenly froze. An old, weak man, those familiar lines on his face. It was your former master, the man who had sold you to the gladiator school. The cruelty of time had caught up with him, just like it does with everyone else. His son had lost all his money to gambling and sold his own father into slavery to pay off his debts. Roman law allowed it. Now the man who had whipped you in your childhood stood in front of you chained, exhausted, and worn down. The seller stepped up beside you. "Has something caught your interest, sir?" Hundreds, maybe thousands, of thoughts rushed through your mind. You could buy this man and make him your slave. It was time for revenge. But then you saw the fear and helplessness in the old man's eyes, the same fear you had carried with you for years. You bought the man and took him home, gave him food and water. He was completely confused, then suddenly, he recognized you. You're that boy? Yes. I'm the boy you sold to the gladiator school years ago. Ashamed and terrified, he begged for mercy. You took the freedom document out of your pocket and wrote the old man's name on it. "You're free now," you said. But why are you doing this?" "Because I won't become someone like you. Rome may be able to make me a slave, but it can't make me a monster, and it never will." The man began to cry. "Go," you said. "And never be anyone's master again. Just be a human being." The door closed. You were alone. Strange feelings filled you. This wasn't anger, and it wasn't revenge. Maybe it was peace. You were a free man. Truly free. The past no longer mattered. That night, for the first time in years, you slept in peace.